all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Consideration of the agenda. The agenda for tonight is basically continuing our review of proposed zoning ordinance amendments. And in particular, Articles 5, 13, 3, the map, and Articles 3 and 4. Any questions or aspects of the agenda for the commission members to bring forward?
I've got one question. If we were to also review and have any comments on the table of contents or the definitions, that's not tonight. Is that a different meeting?
I think we can certainly
Tonight,
bring
we
it up,
have 3,
discuss.
4, 5, 13 in the map. The definitions are in 14 and table of contents is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think if there's something particular that you need to make reference to those, that's fine. And then we'll do the full discussion of definitions probably in 2 meetings
Okay.
still. Unless you want, I mean, if you want to talk about them tonight, I mean, that's.
No, I don't think tonight makes sense, but probably at the conclusion, I think we've already at least had a few things that we had to look at the definitions and maybe rewrite them or retitle
Yeah.
them. And so it makes
Yeah.
sense to do maybe as a last effort.
Yep. And I made notes from our meeting on Monday of definition, like words. I'll
Thanks.
continue to do that.
Other questions or comments on the agenda for this evening? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the agenda for the evening?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second it.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Conflicts of interest? Is there anyone that feels they have a conflict of interest with any of the topics to discuss this evening on the agenda?
No.
With that, we'll open it up for public comment on the agenda items if there's anyone from the public. Doesn't appear we have anyone. So with that, we'll move into the heart of the meeting. So I guess I'll open it by just saying, so Sarah felt it was a great discussion we had on Monday, got into it in a pretty meaningful and depth way. We're going to continue that forward today. I guess I'd just open it up to the floor if there's anyone that has any questions or comments from last meeting, anything, the burning issues, anything of that nature before we dive into Articles 5 here. Wasn't sure if it was something I said. She says, I've had enough.
I'm out of here.
Sarah, is there anything you would comment on from last time? Any questions or for the commission?
No questions. I really appreciate all the discussion that we had. I think that it was very valuable, and thank you for taking the time and going through and making notes and asking questions throughout the process. That's what the Planning Commission is here for, and to make it a better document. The more eyes we have on it, the more it makes sense to everybody is good. So thank you.
Sure. Okay, with that, well, let's go into Article 5. Article 5 is kind of a beast. There's a lot in there. We've actually touched on it as a commission earlier with some of the sign ordinances before, so at least that's some good news there. But Bill, I know you had some questions or some general comments. Did you want to kick things off, or do you want to just start diving through this?
Yeah, no, I'll start. And Sarah, I sent an email to you. I didn't send it to the whole group because the questions I had, I didn't want to derail all of 5, but I've worked with a lot of site development standards, codes, guidelines. It seems strange that this one is more about the amenities or the improvements and not about the site plan, grading, drainage, utilities. That I guess I'm more familiar with site development standards about developing the site. These are what I would call improvements to a site, lighting, fencing, or even ancillary improvements where does an applicant start if, with an application to develop a property or to redevelop a property? Because this would have it start with landscaping, some of the improvements, some of the amenities as opposed to the site plan, grading, drainage, utilities, public and safety, fire and safety access, some meatier parts of site development. So my question is the title of Article 5 wrong? Or is there a different section that should come in before landscaping and some of these other aesthetic things?
Yeah. I mean, you could title site development standards something different. If you don't like that name in zoning and in planning, these are usually what we call site development standards because they are landscaping and items like that. I think that a lot of those kind of meatier items, we just don't have those regulations in Torch Lake Township. Yeah.
So they're nowhere in the ordinance right now.
No.
So an applicant wouldn't start with a meeting and say, okay, develop a site plan and show us the site plan. Where's that covered?
That's kind of covered in the site plan and special use chapters. So 7 and 8.
Okay.
So kind of the process would be, here's your zoning district, here's your use. The use is either special use, which requires a site plan, or just site plan review, which requires a site plan. Then your site plan is required to contain this information, and there's a box there. So you develop it, and that shows on there utilities, stormwater, things like that. And so when you're developing that site plan, you're going to go back here and say, okay, landscaping. Article 3 tells me I need to have a berm. What's
Okay.
a berm look like? That's in Article 5. It gives you the things for that. But the township doesn't have, hasn't adopted the International Fire Code to bring over regulations. I suppose we could put in regulations because some ordinances say, a subdivision with more than 30 lots have to have 2 access points. I mean, you could put some of that into the zoning ordinance. Our current zoning ordinance doesn't have regulations like that. The same with stormwater. Our current ordinance doesn't talk about stormwater at all. Here, I don't remember if I took it out or if I did provide some stormwater at the end of Article 5. Because we don't have any regulations. Stormwater does fall on the backs of the township to regulate. The county does not do it. And I know this because I had a conversation with the county and the soil erosion officer. They deal with soil erosion. So soil erosion happens during construction. After construction is done, there's no regulation of
There's no SWIPs.
water that goes off your site, debris that goes off your site, and that falls on the township. We don't have a stormwater ordinance. It could be something that the township could look into, but then you have to go through regulating it. So then you'd have to have your engineer review the plans to meet stormwater. You have to have the criteria or the design standards, things like that. So some of that stuff is.
So the site plan review, that's all covered. My interest is really, is this covered well? I wouldn't suggest changing the name. Maybe it goes after site plan review, but stormwater runoff, SWIP, stormwater prevention plan, not part of this review.
Right. So there's
But
just.
maybe we put it on a hook. I do think that's important to the township. I think it's
It's
important to the
interesting
water. And so maybe
because-
that's an agenda for the supervisor to consider or something we deal with later. It's not, if there is no policy,
Well, and
that's an important one. I think we ought to consider having be a policy at some point in the future.
Especially when water's one of our biggest
Right.
resources. And it's interesting hearing Sarah say that I was assuming that we did because with my own building permits, I had to address runoff from the roof. And it wasn't the county that was looking for it, it was Eagle. Because Eagle wants to make sure it comes in and there's a place for the water to settle and percolate
Right.
through and then go into the lake as opposed to just running straight into the lake. So, but how does that's Eagle, and their Eagle only cares because it's a critical dune. If it weren't on a critical dune, then I'm not sure nobody would be looking at.
I mean, I think the DNR handles it when it's within a certain number of feet from the
From the
water
water.
with silt fences, but that doesn't handle
But, and
ag
that's,
property or inland property that also has runoff that goes into the water system.
and that's only during construction even, right?
Right.
What about post-construction, just structure itself?
So here I did look on 5.6, which is on page 83 of the document. It talks about stormwater management, that your runoff shall not increase based on construction. That's kind of the only stormwater provisions that we have. Remember, I wrote this was back in October, so I've learned some since then. But the more that I think about that and trying to apply that, because I've had some situations now where the ordinance is similar to that, and they're in the middle of construction, and you're going, how do we know what's going on? Is this a single family dwelling? Is it commercial?
Yeah.
You know, what's that look like? And so without the stormwater control ordinance, which I thought the county had when I wrote this, because it's talking about provisions in the stormwater management plan or ordinance, there's not one. So I can tell you that 5.6 needs to be adjusted to deal with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it would be, the planning commission, if you're feeling comfortable, to kind of say, make a recommendation to the township board and be like, hey, you need to look into this. And stormwater reviews and things like that can all be covered by an escrow by somebody to pay the township engineer. So there may be minimal additional costs to the township once you have the ordinance, but most of the cost related to it should be covered by the applicant.
Right.
To do it. We just need to find out what level you're doing that at. Like I said, commercial, if it's residential, that's within 100 feet, 500 feet of the water, where's that line? And some of the residential is easy enough where it's, you need to put gutters and downspouts and French drains in when you build your house. A lot of times that deals with most of your stormwater for a single family dwelling. So even if we have some design standards, so it's an easy zoning administrator, you're like, you have a gutter, is it on your plans that you're doing this? And then a check before the end to say, yep, you actually put those gutters on your house. You didn't just have them on the plan to help with it. So some of the development I don't think would be too out of control, like garages and houses of certain sizes. I think we can create a general rule.
Okay.
Need more. And it's going to be, the conversation about stormwater is only getting worse. The storms we have in general, but then the development and concerns. So.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I kind of get off.
That'll minimize my
further down.
comments then on 5 now that I know we've got to handle another place, and appreciate the conversation in advance. of
Although
it.
I do want to push on it a little bit. So we know it's handled in another place, but we don't know exactly how we're going to handle it yet, correct?
Right. That section I'll need to come back to. And this is a
Okay.
recent thing that I learned in the last 2 weeks about stormwater in Antrim County.
Yeah, and again, I just want to reemphasize that, and if you think of a commercial site, you can imagine a pretty sized commercial piece right up here in Eastport area there, and with a pretty large parking lot, all the water and the impacts that has and how quickly that with torrential rains and where that water goes. And there's obviously the wetlands and it comes into Torch.
It's dealt with a little bit in here. It talks about the percentage of property that can be impervious. So where you put concrete or blacktop that no longer soaks in the water, where does it go?
That's
not handled.
Exactly.
A detention basin or pond that holds it for 24 or 48 hours is the more common way to do it. And that requires a piece of the site.
So Sarah, you're going to make note of that when we get to that section. Was that in chapter 8 or section 8?
5.6 was
5.
that. So we'll talk about,
Oh,
when we
so-
get there tonight, and I'll say, let's just skip over this. I'll bring you something else back.
Okay.
So,
Okay with that. So I guess we just start diving into this.
yeah, unless anybody has some general questions to start with. Okay. So what do we've got here? Page 64 is the first one. 64, 65.
Yeah,
So I know not last night, Monday night, you had asked me about Andy, who this applies to, landscaping specifically when you're looking at it. And I said to you, it's not residential. This is intended for commercial. So I'm going to double check that that is an accurate statement. But we do talk about, they're required for any of the following, anything requiring a site plan review, which is typically commercial, multifamily type of things. Residential structure additions is kind of where we're falling into applying for the landscaping requirements. So I do want to, I kind of mentioned it, but this section of landscaping tells you how and types of landscaping, potentially where. But in Article 3 in the district, it tells you more details about, commercial uses shall have, I don't know what the number is, but so many trees on your road right of way or per lot or whatever it looks like. So those specific requirements are in Article 3. So kind of when you read this without Article 3, you're going, there's a bunch of requirements here, but there's not really requirements here. How many trees do I plant? That's in Article 3.
yeah. And I, now that I'm going back through this, I'm answering my own question because a landscape plan required with this article is required for the following. All uses requiring site plan review, additions to existing non-residential structures. That was the part that threw me because I started reading through them. I'm like, my God, do we do this for a person building a house? They have a tree this big around at shoulder height. And that didn't seem right. So it's indeed, I was wrong in the way I was looking at it. So I'm better now.
A lot of the articles have what I think is a pretty good short paragraph. It has that short paragraph like many articles. They don't all, but many do. And that's, okay, now I understand what this section means. If I'm building a new home, if it's a commercial development, it helps kind of guide through the rest of the pages and make sense. And that's might be partly why I got lost. I'm like, where are we dealing with some of the real construction things or the approval process even?
I think that was one thing that someone brought up as we were going through this, Bob did, about making a note somewhere, this article should be used with Article 3, or referencing Article 3 in some way.
We know how you love cross-references.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm okay with a couple of them.
Yeah, I think if there are 4 or 5 sentences that describe this section, because it's a pretty meaty section, but just simply adding a little bit of an introductory paragraph will help any applicant or resident kind of figure out where in all of the sections, subsections in 5 they need to go to.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I absolutely can add that in there. Any other comments at this opening? Requirements, except for the ones we just added in for the village business district, well, the village district essentially. That requires, I think we had some like foundation plantings or road right of way plantings, those things. So currently we don't really have what kind of trees, what they look like, things like that, when we added those requirements into the business district. So this is trying to run the line between, we don't currently have anything, but we want to have a little bit of something. So I'm looking for feedback. Like, if you're like, this is too much, let me know. But I think that you're kind of at that moment where you could have some really good impact with landscaping because you have some development, but you're not too far down the road. You're probably going to get some redevelopment where you can actually get the landscaping because most of the time people come along way after they're on this corridor is ugly, and that's because there's no landscaping, and then you try to implement it, it just takes a long time. So I think the township's in a good spot where you could see some of this landscaping helping out in the future once we get further developed out.
So this kind of falls within these standards and criteria. When I first read it, I thought, boy, this seems kind of draconian. But then that was because I was thinking of it in terms of residential. But then I thought, if I were a person coming in, putting a new store in or something like that, it totally changed my view of it. And I thought, yeah, it probably seems reasonable, or at least as a starting point. So I don't have a strong reaction one way or the other as it relates to developing a new store, a new business coming in. I would think a place like this we would want some kind of a standards around it. For the reasons that Sarah just outlined, because we're going to get more development here, and we want it to look nice when people go through it. So question is, what's a reasonable amount of requirements? So what were your reactions to it when you saw it?
I thought it was well written, I understood it, which is, this is a stretch for me, I'm gonna be real honest, but, I pretty much, so far, I'm okay with it. With how it's written.
Laura, what's your view on this as far as kind of a commercial development or a
Yeah,
non-residential?
when I first read it, I was like, wow, man, it's a lot more that they're gonna have to do, but yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be nice. And as someone wanting to put a business here, you're probably gonna be okay with that. You want it to look nice, you want it to look inviting, you want it to not look out of place. Yeah, why not?
One of the things in the class that I had, the new trend is that in development, there's more emphasis on form than function. So you get this idea of what you want it to look like, and you build that into your requirements. And the business per se is not as relevant. Like for instance, the parking in back and the landscaping, and even to the point of what you want the facade to look like, what we're talking about business district. So I thought that was an interesting.
I think that's especially true here. I think, to me, the landscape is all about aesthetics and buffer. And to maintaining the character, whether you want to consider it rural or up north. And so I thought they were good guidelines because the end result will be consistency throughout the township. And that's a form. As opposed to some parking in front, some in back, some no landscaping, some lots of landscaping. And that's really what ordinances are, to create what you want to have over time. I like the section, to me, it is about enhancing aesthetics more than improving visual image, because we've got a good visual image. So that was, wordsmithing that you don't want us to do because it's not policy, but we're not trying to improve the visual image. We're trying to enhance and maintain the aesthetics that we have. And a lot of that is through buffering and landscaping. And then I had one question just on the very top on 5.1C. It doesn't include agricultural. So it talks about, improving the appearance, character, and economic value of residential, civic, commercial, and industrial development. I understand it's about development, but there's agricultural development. We've got agricultural areas, and one of our speakers in the last couple of meetings said, what if I wanted to put, it was related to signage. I own a bunch of property. I'm an ag. What if I wanted to have a winery or a cidery or something like that? And I just thought it was interesting that industrial's in there where we don't have any, but agricultural is not. We've got a boatload.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I agree, that's a good point. I had one kind of, I'm not sure how to put this question, but when I did read through this, it felt, I was trying to balance having the standards that would enable us to keep things looking nice and so forth. At the same token, I don't want them so that it starts to look like downstate, that we look like, Novi or Northville or something like that. Even Novi is a terrible example, but Northville would be a good one. It's a beautiful community, but it looks like a downstate nice town. That's not what this is. So how do you strike the balance between something like this and that without putting in requirements that pretty soon, anytime you get a new business, that looks like everything's perfectly manicured and it's just beautiful shrubbery, and it just starts to have a very different feel to it. I don't know what the answer to that is, but as we go through this, we have to keep that in mind. Maybe it's when we get back to the master plan too, part of that.
I think part of it has to do with the master plan. In 521E, starts to get there, promote the use of native plant materials. And it says discouraging invasive, could be discouraging just non-native for the area. I found that they do a lot better, native plant, they just do. The native plants and grasses, less water, less maintenance, they thrive. You try to introduce something, even if it's not invasive, but it's not natural here, doesn't do as well, requires more watering, maintenance, and all of that. But that kind of keeps us from looking like some other part of the state, simply by the native plants.
I'd heard there was a palm tree planted not too far from here.
Well, and that is something, I mean, I think that's a discussion to be had because the native plants aren't necessarily always the pretty plants.
You're right.
Right? But they do. You are right because they require less maintenance if they're native to the area and they grow
look
better. You don't have to water them. You may have to water them a little bit to get them established. Don't have to water them as frequently. It does have a different look and character, but look where we are and look what it looks like versus manicured grass and different things. And so, but a lot of communities are hesitant to say native. Some have fully embraced it and it's kind of like a 50-50 mix. So I'm happy to hear you say that because I agree. I mean, I think there's a ton of other implications by doing native that are positive when you look at it instead of being a negative.
I think I would prefer that we say we can have invasive trees. And I think when you said they're not as attractive, but because we're not used to them.
Right.
And we're used to seeing them as weeds along the road. But I gather those all the time and people say, where did you get those? Those are beautiful. So
Right.
it can be beautiful. And it could be part of our identity too.
I think that's great.
So from a policy perspective, is there a way to beef up that you promote and encourage the use of native plant materials, having something to do with the master plan, sort of, or aesthetics,
Yeah, I mean.
and not use invasive species?
Yeah. And I think that what I would add there is, and discourage the use of invasive and non-native plant materials, just to beef that up a little bit. I'll have to look through here. I'm sure, I mean, I guess I kind of already covered it, which is a little bold under 5.2.3, A number 4, which is page 64.
Yeah.
Native species noted in the applicable planting zone for Michigan are required. So I guess I did do that, but maybe I need to say all plantings. I don't need to argue over, well, I planted 3. All your plantings shall be native. If you're comfortable with that.
Can we, if we can do that by policy, that's great. I didn't know that, I wasn't sure if we'd be able to legislate Laura not planting the palm trees in her yard.
Yeah, well, Laura can plant them at her house, but she can't plant them at her business.
But what if I open a tanning salon, which would go very well here, I'm sure, and that totally fits.
Planted indoors.
Right. I don't know. Is there any? Is it difficult to purchase?
I don't think. No, I mean, some of the businesses that I've worked with through the process of native plantings, they actually go to like the local conservancy and they'll buy during like their plant sale, or they'll talk to the conservancy, and when the conservancy is buying for their plant sale, they'll buy the extra for them. So it may take a little collaboration, but there are opportunities for it, and there can be even less expensive and easier to obtain in that way.
I think it would be good for us, and we talked about making some more resources available to people when we had, I forget her name, come in and talk about it.
Yeah.
So if we can make a big effort to hook these people up with those resources, then it makes it even easier. Yeah.
I mean, I think it could be as easy, and I could reach out to the Conservancy or even to Kyle, who's now at the soil erosion office. They may have something, but you know, a brochure you can put on the counter about native species, even for, you know, the homeowner to learn about it and to do that as well. But just kind of as a, I don't want to necessarily be like promote this how it, but educate and have the resources. So I think that would be a great opportunity to just with something quick and easy.
Kind of to that line, and this is probably something more along when we do master planning work, but, you know, it would be neat. I've always thought that whenever we get through a rewrite of the master plan or a readdressing, whatever we call it, that it's maybe a little different form and how it's delivered. Obviously, there would be a document associated with it, but it's almost like if you could envision something that's multimedia based. And in that way, you could introduce, it would be neat to, like, when we have examples and we're trying to show what we're striving for when the use of native species, and to Denise's point, like, it's like, well, they're not, there's a perception that they're not as pretty. Well, if we had pictures of what they could look like, and you put that as kind of examples to show, here's native plants, here's how they can look. If you're building a business here, here's how it can look by doing this, and it takes away that perception. It might really help strive towards people to visualize where we're headed.
Right. Right. And you're not the only one, so don't feel like you're putting an undue burden on, you know, a commercial business that's coming in here. You tell them what they need to plant and they're going to do it for you. They just need to know what the rules are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments throughout this section
Yeah.
then?
So we kind of were on 60 through 64 a little bit. I don't know if you have any detailed things in this landscaping section, if anybody has a spot where we need to stop. '65, '66, '67, that's all the landscaping. Then we get into parking requirements. So again, this is describing parking, what it looks like, but the specific numbers for parking is up in Article 3 for each of the use. We are doing minimum parking requirements. Some communities have switched to maximum parking. We can go either way you want to go on that. You don't have a lot of commercial area, so I'm fine with minimum. I don't know that you have an excess of parking and can share, and I would almost be more concerned about people putting not enough parking and then having parking on the road and causing bigger issues at this point, but that's kind of my thought and perception of it. So if you're comfortable keeping minimums, we'll do that until a later date.
I am.
Okay.
What about everybody else?
Yeah.
I'm good with it as well.
For all the reasons you described. And for the aesthetics.
Yeah.
We also don't have a holiday crush, which a lot of the
Yeah.
parking maxims are built for. It's for
Right.
that month where there's a lot more. We don't have a need for that now.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so then working our way through off-street parking, that's on page 68, 69.
I had it noted that probably someone might have something to say about 531B2.
531B2. Not allowed in the front. So, right, in the front yard. And so the front yard is the area between the road and the building, no matter how far it's set back from the road. So it's not the setback, it's that whole space.
Probably hard to imagine because we have so many businesses right now that would be in violation of that because we didn't have it. So now we're trying to draw the line in the sand going forward, it would change. So is your concern that it's too restrictive or just worried that people will have an issue with it?
I just, I don't personally, I don't care either way myself, but it was just one thing that we had discussion on.
Yeah. So you can still have it on the side of the side of the business in the back, and anybody that currently has it in the front can continue to have it in the front. It's more so when the site's redeveloped, they need to move the building up. well, we would assume, we're making the assumption, but that they would move the building up closer to the road so they can get their parking on the side. They may still keep it back and put the parking behind it still, but.
What did you say, that when you move them front, does it slow the traffic or something? Was there something like that?
It can help slow the traffic, but it just helps so people can see the businesses too. And yeah, the parking is just ugly, put it in the back. I know there's kind of this thought that, well, people won't know if I'm open, or the more cars generate more business type of thing. But you have the side yard too. And, here it's just, the reality is we've got limited commercial area. This isn't South Airport that we're dealing with, or,
Right.
Division there by Myers, that whole strip. Like, we want to keep it kind of villagey. And so then if somebody can put a sidewalk in, and you can, and I don't know if you want to walk along 31, right, in the village, but, maybe M88, but just kind of, it has a totally different feel when it's all grass and trees and things up front instead of parking lot. It's harder to get from the road into the business, when you got to walk through a big parking lot to get there. So
What are the rules again? So with that, what if you're a business that's on two streets? Do you have to just the sides of those two? So two boundaries then would be restricted.
right, you have two fronts. Okay. So walking through then 68, 69, 70.
I had a question about the surfacing of parking spaces, and is that, I was thinking about it. We currently have several businesses without paved parking, so this would be for new, or do people have to?
Nope, it would be just for new or redevelopment of the property. They would need to. This is one of those items, that what I found is you just be very straightforward in what you want, because otherwise, that's why it says gravel shall not be allowed, because people come in and make arguments about, well, I'm going to brine the gravel or the dirt, and so it's durable and dustless, and I'm like, no, and then they don't maintain it.
Yeah.
So, and we can go any way you want to go. I mean, I know that is an additional burden on a business to have to pave their parking lot to do that, but it would be just new projects that would have to do it. And, but it provides for better parking because you can stripe the parking lot so people park while they're supposed to park. It's safer for pedestrians and vehicles, access management, because you have, it functions like parking lot with stripes and people know where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Plus it helps protect the neighbors. When you're looking in our village districts, our village business is right next to our residential properties, and the dust generated from driving through a parking lot could impact your neighbor. So.
Is the level of redevelopment well-defined for when it would trigger going from an existing gravel or dirt lot to a surface lot?
Let me double check because it's not right in this area. I think it's in the non-conforming section. So let's see what it says. So I'll make a note here to double check
Okay.
that.
For bicycle parking, into itself seems pretty straightforward, but we were talking about having this bike path thing come through.
Tart trail.
I guess we just want to make sure that we don't do anything here that restricts that ability to do that, or somehow they tie together.
So, yeah, so like in the commercial district, which is in the village, in Article 3, we've got one bicycle parking for every 10 parking spaces. In the village, what's in there? Same thing, 1 per 10. So that's the minimum you're required to put in when you put in. which is still, I mean, if you think about the size of the lots that are in your commercial districts, you're not going to get a lot of 200 parking spaces. You know, you might get 40.
Right.
You know, what did Dollar General had? 42 or 46 maybe? They'd be required to put in 5 bicycle parking spots, so a bike rack. We can be more aggressive if you want, but I think that's a pretty reasonable, you know, start there.
I think that's fine. It just, the businesses themselves can always add more.
Oh, absolutely.
The market will drive
If
it. That's
they-
what
and
I'm
if they
thinking.
want, they're gonna build it based on where.
If
they're
it's
trying to
built
attract.
and if it's more active, the market will drive that.
Although some areas have struggled, the village of Sutton's Bay, for instance, because they were kind of at the end of the other end of the tar trail. For a while, you know, people were just leaving bikes kind of in the sidewalk or kind of awkward places because they didn't have facilities for the bikes. So it was somebody kind of being like, we got to do something. And, you know, they had a downtown area. It's a little bit functions differently, but it was kind of that realization with the trail ending there and the businesses, yeah, we need to make sure that these bikes are taken care
I
of.
would think if that's built, either TLC will put more spaces out there or there'll be funding through the TART trail to add bicycle facilities along the TART trail at trailheads or at commercial establishments, and there'll be funding available for it.
And it is one of those easy things that you can put in later. Some ordinances have really specific bike parking on what it looks like. This
Yep.
doesn't have that detail. It just says you have to provide the spaces. So it can be something that can be retrofitted fairly easily and still meet the ordinance without too much difficulty, honestly. Okay. Next page is 71, talking about access management.
I've got a couple questions and comments on that. Starting with does the site plan review make it easy to understand how you'd provide, it says stacking areas should be arranged for convenient access and safety of pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles. That's pretty vague. But does the site plan review process allow for staff, for the township to see how that arrangement is?
Yeah, I think because one of the standards is kind of almost the same language. So there's not specific, these are bad practices. It's more when you're in, I like the flexibility because then when somebody does something, you know, really stupid,
Mhm.
you're like, come on.
Move
Nope, I
this
don't.
here, right?
Yeah. And I guess we could always go back to and be like, okay, if they want to argue with us, we're going to go engineer, tell me how this works and how traffic flows if we need to. But yeah, I mean, the standards kind of goes right back into this. So I think it protects the township, even though it's not super specific what that means.
The site plan review process allows you to
Yeah.
put the specifics down to a site
Yeah,
plan on how
yeah.
everything's laid out so that
Right.
you can determine, seems like that would be a lot safer.
Right. Yes.
Then while I'm on curb cuts, on one, it talks about the driveways closer from a property line, but it doesn't address driveways in proximity to any intersection.
Mm.
I think it should, and it should be more than 25 feet. And there are standard traffic codes that probably the county has or the state has for 31. It's probably at least 100 feet. I think that'd be important to put in here just so people don't say, all right, 25 feet from a property line, the property line's a road. Driveways 25 feet from an intersection are not ideal.
Yeah. Good point.
And then on G3A, more than 600 feet, 2 driveway cuts. What about a corner lot?
I would say that the corner would have, maybe not our corners. My comment was going to be a corner probably has over 600, so that's where that would be the exception. But it may not. They may be down to 400. So would you want to give the exception, shall be limited to one access point, and then say maybe a B parcels on a corner can have one on each?
My
Each
motion was
road.
going to be to add a B to that, 3B, something that deals with a corner lot, whether or not there's another drive allowed or not. probably still based on some minimum linear footage.
And maintaining the distance from the intersection.
And that's why I was thinking of those two things together, a corner lot and a driveway distance for an intersection. So if you got a corner lot that's only 50 by 50, you don't get two, you get one. It's got to be 25 feet, so it is within 25 feet of an intersection. But if you have a corner lot that's 300 by 300, seems reasonable that you might have two driveways as long as they're spaced. You figure out the number based on code for the county,
Right.
but within 100 feet, no closer than 100 feet from intersection, or whatever that minimum standard might be from a county road or a state road. I mean, it deals with the long linear property, this ordinance does, but it doesn't really deal with a corner lot.
Okay. I think that's a good point. And then loading zones is kind of the last part of the parking requirements. Okay, moving into lighting. Page 72, 73. '74.
Is there anything that anyone wants to put in about hours?
There's a little bit, so let me double check before I make this comment.
554. Oh, it was 554 is where I had that noted.
Exterior lighting.
Yeah, so what,
Mhm,
5.4.5A talks, yeah, about between the hours of 10 PM and sunrise, except for as necessary for security purposes, which is similar, if not the same language that's in our current ordinance.
So it's like a car dealer. So if we had a sizable car dealer here, and they typically light up their dealerships, how that they do it for people who can see the vehicles, but they also do it for security at night. So in that case, they'd be able to have pretty bright lights up there all night.
They would, I mean, the planning commission, I mean, that's part of your approval process. Because you're gonna be approving the site plans and the special uses for those. And you know, I don't even know, we'd have to check the use. Do I have car dealers as a use? In the
I don't
RO?
ever remember seeing
So,
it, but
right.
I flagged that a whole section because you envision a great big old car dealer, just lights up the whole horizon.
Yeah. And you
Hard
know,
to
they
envision
kind of
one
get
like that
their,
here, but you never know.
they kind of get their own exceptions too about the maximum lighting intensity is brighter and all of that, which I personally am not a huge fan of, but I also understand that they do it for reasons, but we all park in darker parking lots and have enough security. But I will follow your lead on that one with the cars. As far as, except for necessary for security purposes, I guess that would be up to the plan to determine what security purposes are.
So I guess my concern is this 5.4.4B and the
Yeah,
exceptions of that whole,
I mean, I think you could strike that whole
Strike
paragraph.
the whole thing
personally,
out.
but, yeah, take it out. I mean, they still can be lit, they just don't need to be a landing strip. Anything else with lighting? Signs has not, well, we started with this sign section in our last time around, but this has not been updated to reflect the changes we made when we discussed signs. So I need to go back and put that in. So we started with this draft when we started a couple of months ago. But This needs
That's
to-
why.
So
I
can
felt
we,
like- That's why I felt like deja vu.
yes.
Yeah.
And I
You were like,
knew
Sarah, didn't you hear
at
me?
least- I knew at least part of it was deja vu. I just didn't know which deja vu was real. and not. But
So,
so can we, since we already went through this and
Right.
discussed it as a commission, can we just pop that section, pop it in
Yes.
here and be done with it?
yep, we'll pop it in there. And the board did approve that and that did get published. So it'll get published in tomorrow's paper. So 8 days later will be effective, that new sign section.
So what pages does that cover?
That goes all the way up to page 83. And 83 has the comment about stormwater on it. And so I'm gonna revise that too. So we would be done with Article 5 unless anybody has additional comments on it. Okay. What's the next chapter? 13?
Yep, on to 13.
So 13 is on page 1.
We touched on 12 last meeting, correct?
12 was, no, we still need to do 12.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to 12 yet, because that's all administrative. Maybe we were gonna talk about it today. I changed the list a little bit from what I told you in that email the one time, because I was going, there's no way we're gonna make it through all these chapters tonight. So there's a couple chapters I left off from your original list, and it might have been 12. So Article 13 is all amendments and severability, so it's their little legal part in there. It's on page 156. So this section gives us a little bit more description and more about the process for a amendment or rezoning to the ordinance, including the standards that we have moved up to Township Board as well.
Those are the standards that we looked at a previous meeting.
Correct.
And made a recommendation to take to the board, and the
Yes,
board's going to
and
look
I
at.
pulled those right out of here, so that's the
Yep.
same language. So no changes needed, and then reapplication as well. Currently, our ordinance doesn't really have this reapplication thing, so if you denied somebody, they could come back and reapply for the same thing, which doesn't seem like somebody would do that, but this just gives a little bit more guidance about that reapplication to not waste planning commission's time with the same or similar application. And then we get into conditional rezoning 13.2. And we started talking just really briefly about this on Monday and what we should do with that. And I didn't get a chance to send out any additional information on conditional rezoning for you. So I'm still willing to do that. And we can always come back to this section to discuss it a little bit further. Denise did bring in her book that has some conditional rezoning kind of slides on it. And they're kind of short, so if you don't mind, I'll just read them really quick. So it talks about conditions condition that only a specific type of land use will be built and not any other uses allowed in the district, only available upon property owner initiative, cannot be imposed on or required of an owner. Legislative body decides whether to accept offer, can set a deadline to accomplish the use, which is kind of nice in there. And I would double check, because that when I read that, I was like, I wonder if that's in here. If a violation or missed deadline, property reverts to previous zoning. And then the next slide talks about adopt ordinance provisions for this process. All other zoning procedures remain the same. And it's evaluated the same way as any rezoning. And it says, do not permit something not listed in the proposed district. And if accepted, PC should prepare ordinance text amendment, put on the zoning map, and record with the Register of Deeds. So that second slide, where adopt zoning ordinance provisions, that's where we're at here. But the rest of that is all included in here. We evaluated it the same way and required to be recorded at the Register of Deeds.
So you were going to reach out and do a little bit more research on it, right?
Yep. And I haven't had a chance to
Right.
get that out to you.
So I would move that we not spend material time until she has a chance to do that and then come back to it.
Yes.
Also be curious to get Steve Langworthy's take on whether what his view would be of us having something like this or not. Because I just remember in the class I was in that he was talking about it. It seemed like it, could be useful for a developer. It's a tool for the developer, really, to come in and succinctly come in and say, if I do this, would this be acceptable? And then you can vote on and decide or not. And then it carries forward and modifies the zoning for that. But it also, I remember him talking about some of the challenges with it because it's kind of forward thinking as an approach. On the flip side, it's a little bit confusing. I kind of remember him saying that, it's hard enough to manage the current zoning we have, and you get this kind of weird thing that's special and unique. So we just have to think it through is all.
Andy, I didn't hear what you said your motion was, that we'd not spend time on.
Oh, that until Sarah has a chance to do the research that we talked about last time,
Okay.
that as a commission, we don't dive into it until she comes back with some
Don't
of that
dive
context.
into,
Conditional rezoning.
And
Okay.
just the conditional rezoning part.
okay.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Because at the end of the day, we can decide to keep it in here and this
Yep.
is good, or we can take it out and not. We don't have to have it.
Got it.
Okay. So then we just have the last couple of sections in that chapter, that's severability and,
I've got a comment on the amendment review procedure. First of all, I thought 13.1's well-written, one of the easier sections to read through and understand, including the part we're not going to go through, which is conditional rezoning. But when I read through the amendment review procedure, I felt like there's something missing in D, which are it has to do with the factors the planning commission would use in making a decision to amend. Because I've been on the planning commission, so many of the conversations we have are about what fits with the character primarily. Character of the township is not really addressed here. It kind of is when it talks about the apparent demand for a change. It kind of is when it talks about, and 9 says other factors deemed appropriate by the planning commission. I didn't write it out, but I think there could be somewhere in those 9, something and it's really addressed when it's, number 1, consistency with the master plan goals and policies, compatibility with the uses. Those all get close, but it doesn't really define what most of our conversations and debate are about. Does it fit here or not? Where there's Dollar General and its size. So my motion is to add one in there about fitting with the character of the township, which is in itself vague, but many of these are. But I think, why would we amend it? If the township, if the residents, if the planning commission at the time says, you know what, we want to move past with the current character.
I don't oppose that. I think that within the master plan today, it does talk about that character a lot.
Yep.
So to have it
If
in
it's
here
covered
is
in one.
just, but it doesn't hurt to say it there either.
I think we can add it in there, and I might be able to sprinkle it into maybe a couple of them somehow in the character to just, 'cause I
Drive it
think-
home.
Yeah, relevant. I mean, it could, in 1, it could go into 3.
It does kind of make me remember when we reviewed Dollar General, there was a whole bunch of standards, and there was everything kind of hung on the last one. That was the closest thing to what you just described.
Everything's covered in 1, so that's a real soft motion. Because everything, if the master plan is, the update to that is to cover that, then we're okay. but it might also be worth adding in, since that's one of the factors we seem to be making decisions on.
I like it. Are you looking for a job, Bill?
I'm sorry?
Are you looking for a job?
I have several.
Do you want to write zoning ordinances?
I've written some.
Okay. So I think.
Actually, I've been the applicant, I've been
Yeah.
on behalf of developers, the one to come in and rewrite them
Yeah.
in favor of development. So
You've got a
I
different
think
eye at
about
it.
both sides when I think through these,
Yeah.
more with the protection of the township and the residents
Yeah.
than in the other thing that I get before.
Yeah.
Have a very unique perspective and super great comments.
So I think we're ready to go up to Article 3.
Yes.
Okay.
uh,
So these
now,
are,
did you want to, is there kind of a, I know the map is contained in
Hmm.
Article 3, but do we have some printouts here?
yeah. I was going to bring some large ones and I forgot to grab them after I printed them out. So, I mean, I think this is a good time before we get into some of the specifics about the districts to kind of look at the map and make sure that it makes sense. And let me explain it a little bit to you. I mean, you've read through the text, you've looked at the map. In general, we kept the districts and the location of the districts the same as what's on the current zoning map. If there's a,
Can I pause you right there?
yeah,
How can we not make them the same?
well, you'd be adopting a brand new map, so you can make them do whatever you want to do. You can change.
But I mean,
parcels. So I mean, there may be, and I would encourage you to think about your community and the lots and if things make sense. Just because it was zoned a certain way doesn't mean that it has to be continued to be zoned that way when we adopt this new map. But also thinking back to the future land use map and that this is kind of more of a restructuring update than a full-blown change all the policy. My next comment is that the change that I did make to the map has to do with the village residential district. And the intent of that was to try to clarify and simplify that area. I think that the language in the current ordinance is very difficult to deal with in that there's a lot of referencing back and forth between the districts. There's some inconsistency between approval processes between the business village and the business residential. And so this is an attempt to improve that, but it also does change the outline or the boundaries of village business. So our district maps, I just have, I have the same districts, but I have village is just your district. And then I put village business as an overlay district for that. So when you're doing the overlay, everything in the underlying district still exists unless the village business district is more restrictive. But it also allows additional uses, but the village business portion of it is in Article 4 as the overlay. And so essentially what's happening is the village business allows all the uses that are allowed in the residential, plus some additional uses, which are all special use permits. But I also changed the outline to say that village business should have frontage on 31 or M88. Our current village business map goes back a little bit further, kind of the second row back on some of those parcels, more into the residential areas. And I think a lot of the village business uses really should be out on the highways and not pushed back into the neighborhood, essentially. So when I was working through the village business, it has to have frontage. So it has to be in the village district, and then it also has to have frontage on 31 M88 or Barnes Park Road to be able to be in the village business district. So that is a change. The subcommittee took a hands-off approach with this and said the planning commission can discuss it. So,
So just, you said 88, 31 Barnes Park Road. What about the cutoff road that comes between 31 and 88? It'd be on the northeast
was it
side.
like the post
Yeah.
office?
Yeah.
I did not include,
And
Pearl
there's,
Street,
and there's
ooh.
those little streets through there.
let me pull it up here.
What's it called? Pearl Street?
Pearl.
Pearl Street.
Pearl?
Yeah, so Pearl Street wouldn't be included. I was gonna look to see if those lots were deep enough. So there's a couple of lots on Pearl, kind of at the corner of Pearl and one road that's north. Is there an actual road there, or is it just a paper road?
There is a road that cuts into the post office.
By the post office that goes
I
on
don't
the
know
post
when
office?
it is.
Yeah. So there's a couple of parcels on that, like behind the post office, those are just residential. And then on the north side of whatever that little road is residential. I don't know what's there right now. Is it commercial or is it residential?
Well, there's a wood selling, they cut the wood there too. Firewood.
Mhm.
So there's a wood cutting right, almost at that point that comes to 31 and Pearl. But everything else, well,
Up until you get to the corner of 88 there, and then you've got
there's
the,
the facility.
Yep.
Care facility. And then there's a building behind it that I'm not sure, it's a storage for some business. I'm not sure what it is.
there's been businesses back in there before. I remember there was a hair salon back in there.
Yeah.
I used to go there. Don't say anything, comment, but
Well, and I think, let me double check. Let me stop and look this before I make a comment.
I guess I either blocked it out or didn't realize that any of it changed any of the parcels.
Yeah. So, and I guess I would have you, take a look. So the village uses, and we'll get here, but the village uses on page 45. So this is village, what we're calling village residential right now, but the village uses are expanded to allow commercial uses with special use permit in that, just the regular village district. But they're kind of supposed to be some lower impacts. There's some other ones there too, but there's special use permits. So like dog grooming is a special use permit anywhere in the village district on this map. So just because we used to call it village residential doesn't mean that now it's strictly a residential district. It's actually much more of a mixed use. It has the residential, higher density residential. It also hopefully has some low impact commercial, although I see one that's here that we have by right that should be a special use permit, but
I support it requiring frontage on those roads. We don't have density there to begin with. And to me, that it wouldn't make sense to have it extend into a buffer zone area that is residential or is transitioned to residential. And so
No,
that's
I-
not a hands-off approach. I just think it makes sense. I think what we want to try and do is create commercial density at those nodes in our villages. And I don't know if you get density, if you're like, well, I've got this parcel that's not quite there, but it happens to be within the district. I'm going to make that commercial. That doesn't seem like a good road to go down.
no, I would agree with that. And that's why I was asking about those corner
Yeah,
cutoff
right.
roads, because whether or not you would include those or just keep it to the,
And that's that way,
I would
the
agree.
roadway that goes around the post office.
Yep.
Let's assume one day it's not a post office. I doubt that happens, but that does seem to be as commercial. It's away from residential, but it's not that far away. You have taken that road, the other road that goes around it, so.
Yep.
If I'd support requiring the frontage on 88 or 31, and if someone else comes in with an application that has to go through a special use permit to be considered, then that would happen anyway.
Yep.
And I don't know that we need to extend the boundary.
no, I wouldn't
To
either.
promote that.
Just in general, it would be, it doesn't even seem, it doesn't seem reasonable. If you think about a Torch Lake up here, Torch Lake
Yeah.
Village, stepping back from the road a little bit, that'd be weird to have businesses just all sprinkled into everybody's houses. Sarah, I do have a broader question. So when you were going through this, and I know with the discussion with the subcommittee and all that, I mean, what problems or what issues were you trying to address? What came to your mind when you were thinking about, okay, we need to make tweaks to this map, and so these are the tweaks that I think I'm going to suggest? What went through your head with that?
Yeah, I didn't really go through and go, oh, this parcel really should be this instead of this. My purpose was to try to catch all the parcels so they were the same that's on the existing map instead of changing parcels. So I don't recall, and Laura, maybe you can help me. I don't recall the subcommittee going through and being like, oh, you know what, this parcel really should be changed or anything like
No.
that. They didn't have a discussion like that where they went kind of street by street and were like, is this right or wrong?
No.
It was more, this is what our current map is. The major change has to do in the village area. And I guess also the waterfront overlay, that's a major change as well as a district. And so, and that's on this map. It does make it a little bit messier, I guess, but in the office, we can do both of them, or we can break them up in the zoning map too, to help show that. And I don't know, did we do that for? Yeah, and so then when you get into each district, we've just pulled out those lots to help emphasize what it is. So, and the waterfront overlay zone that's specifically related to water, it's kind of a buffer setback from that. It's explained in the overlay district section how that the boundary lines for that overlay. And the subcommittee they said, you know what, let's put in a waterfront overlay, put in some language that's kind of middle of the road, other than a lot of the boat hoist and stuff that comes from our current ordinance.
Mhm.
Middle of the road, see what the planning commission has to say about it, and go from there. So that district, the waterfront overlay may be best to talk about once we get to Article 4 versus kind of the village discussion, potentially.
Yeah, we're clearly going to have to go back as we get into the different descriptions of the districts and then we'll talk about it and come back to this map.
Right.
Because I have some general questions, seems like I didn't think about it until I looked at it with this review, but how much R2 there is.
Yeah. And R2 is not a lot different from R1. R1's like waterfront. R2 is residential that's not on the water. In general, maybe we don't need some of the requirements if you have the waterfront overlay, because that protects, that's the water setback and things like that. But maybe you do. I don't know. Right or wrong, or if you want to expand maybe some density into your R2 district versus the R1 district, which I don't remember if it does or doesn't for that. But the zoning board of appeals would like the planning commission to look at and consider some of the smaller lots that we have, if it's appropriate for them to be zoned R1 or R2, because they're not meeting the requirements of the ordinance. So for example, it's hard to see on this map, but on Bay Colony, there's that development that's in there, and those lots are teeny.
Mhm.
I'm not saying write a whole ordinance based on that, but even some of the lake lots, so like down Bayview and Golden Beach and some of those, they're narrower lots and they're not really compatible with how they're currently zoned. And so it may be appropriate to deal with those. I think that's a discussion we need to come back to after the master plan to have that support from there, but kind of know that we're probably headed in that way. And I just don't think it's appropriate to dive into that request yet for it. But I think that the planning commission is going to have a serious discussion about these non-conforming lots and how to deal with them and move forward. Because they can't all go to the zoning board of appeals. That degrades the zoning ordinance. It needs to just be written better for different districts. So.
Could they all come to the planning commission in advance of the master plan being updated though?
Those
Under a
lots,
non-conforming?
they'd all have to go through the ZBA. Actually, they wouldn't. Let me backtrack on that. What happened? There was a guy,
You talking about the more recent one?
yeah, he was gonna come to the ZBA and then he withdrew his application and he was be able to build a house, but he had
Because
like
he had
three
several
houses,
lots
three
together, so he
lots.
had like a chunk of them. And then he had to meet the setbacks and he was able to meet the setbacks in the end.
Yeah, and I can't remember why he was gonna come to the ZBA. It was a setback, but I don't remember what happened. But yeah, he had 3 lots, and in that 3 lots, he could barely build a house and put a septic system that met the ordinance. As far as the width requirement and then the square footage.
We
was
own,
his issue.
we own 2 of them and I don't think, I mean, you could put the chair in the middle and that's about all. You'd probably meet the setback requirements. That's about it. They're so tiny.
Right.
I'm not sure what the history was around how they came to be, but.
Yeah.
we
Well, it was
inherited them,
pre-zoning,
so
right? And pre-zoning, and it was
Yeah.
probably supposed to be like
little-
little cabins or
Yeah.
Yeah.
single wide trailers or something that was
Yeah.
gonna go in there and,
So I've
Yeah.
got 4 suggestions on the map itself.
okay.
Since you said, the overlay district makes it messy, and Andy said he can see it. One is, it seems like it'd be really easy to put on the township website in a digital format, so you could zoom in and see. And that might even minimize the number of people coming in and say, help me understand what my property is zoned. That'd be
Absolutely.
the first suggestion. The other one is that there's either 3 different maps or insets, particularly the 2 villages. Again, so you can see with more clarity the parcels and whether it's red or pink or orange. And I think, I'll make it 3 because that it's always only in color. The black and white version of what I went through, I couldn't really make heads or tails of it until I saw this one. For any, at least applicant, resident that has it in any document, that it's always in color. But I think, this is pretty common, jam it all in. Making it digital would be super easy.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yeah.
probably the county has it, not with our zoning, but they have a parcel map you can zone into, and then you can see
Right.
with letters as a designation what it is. But that feels like it's be something very valuable to put on the website under planning commission, where people are coming in and saying, what am I zoned? Can I build a second house on this lot or not? To be able to zoom in and find their parcel and see what the zone is.
Yeah. And I think,
I thought we had something, there's a tool, because I've used it, like you can dig through the parcels, but it doesn't have the zoning piece
Right.
on top of
right.
it.
And I was going to say,
That's
I don't
the county.
remember if we did a
Yeah, yeah.
digital, but the county may be willing to put that layer. So, we have this GIS
Maybe.
layer now. And if I send it to them and I say, hey,
Right.
could you add this on? And then people could click on the zoning in Torch Lake. Maybe that's the only part it shows up on. And then,
It'd just be a GIS layer.
well, yeah, Torch Lake and Milton and the village of Bog Rapids, because those are all the maps I've done. So it's part of there's only 8 townships and villages that are zoned anyways,
Right.
almost half of them right there.
I think especially when we get to the master plan update, more people will be looking at this a lot. It's like the non-conforming lots, that they'll be, I think, have a lot higher resident interest, even if they're not going to develop or redevelop property. For them to be able to weigh in on the master plan, I think we'd want to be able to see this without it being messy or not being able to see.
Yep. Yeah. And it is hard on paper. It's a struggle because you can't make it big enough and to be able to see the whole township. So we did put the zoning map. Well, I sent it to the website, the draft to be put on the for the packet.
Yeah.
But
Is it timber reserve or timber residential?
it's timber reserve.
Okay, so the map is residential.
Yeah, it'd be cool to be able to zoom in enough to see road names and stuff with that.
And Sarah, another question. How do we know which, you mentioned before, this is the map.
Mhm.
This is the kind of current status. How do we know what's the current status? Because I remember there was some debate around certain portions within about, when that portion was declared and so on. It was around the airport, air park.
Yeah, I mean, this is based on the map that's in the office that I believe to be true and accurate. That is part of the problem though, because there, has been comments made about it not. And so we need to adopt, a whole map to make it valid. I mean, it might be the right one, it might be the wrong one. I don't know. It's the best we have. And so we could go through and re-adopt the old map as is and make sure that it's valid. But yeah, the hard part is, and like this one doesn't have it on it because it's in draft. But when people don't put dates on their maps, it's really difficult to determine what's happening. So I like to put the date, like adopted date, and then when it's amended, you put amended and the date so that you know which version you're looking at. There is a map back there that has a date on it, but why, I don't know, because we didn't update the zoning, the zoning ordinance. I don't know if it was an amendment. It just says there's just the date on this map. And so I don't know what that is reflective of, I guess. But, I mean, I guess if there's a parcel or two that you go, hey, this should be something else. It's supported by our future land use map. And you want to try to deal with it now, we can.
I don't know of anything. I just know the question has been raised. And so
Yeah.
as we move from draft to, established or approved, what have you, then we might get some debate around that.
And I'll go through again too and kind of double check the parcels, because you look at it and every time you look at it, you might find something different. It is important because this is, even if it's done in error, essentially, say we adopt this map and there's a parcel that currently is zoned ag and we zone it residential and come back and go, well, that must have been an error. We weren't by error. I mean, we didn't intentionally change the zoning on it. It was changed it some way. That's still the map that exists. If it was intentional or not intentional, the map that we adopt and publish is the map that we have, and you would have to rezone it back to ag, say, if you really wanted it to be ag. And so it's an important, very important component of the ordinance, and we'll double check it again to make sure that we got the parcels. But there's also humans involved, so we'll do the best we can.
Then out of curiosity, the different levels of zoning we have, how does ours compare to like Milton and others around? Is ours more complex? Is it simpler? Do you have a sense for that?
I think that I'm going to give you a politician answer and I'll come back. I think that it is appropriate for the township. I think it's the right mix of number of districts that you have, and it accurately reflects, what you have and where you want to go. Potentially, the only thing that I struggle with, like if you're talking districts, that's good. There's some of the commercial parcels that are currently zoned commercial and their location, I really struggle with because there's one parcel and it's spot zoning and you can't do that. But that's what currently exists. And I'm not sure I'm ready to start that fight because I know that when you start talking about commercial properties and what that looks like, it's difficult. I know why they're zoned commercial because they have commercial uses on them now, but we may look at once we get back through the master plan, maybe we need to add those uses into the zoning district that they are, kind of like the farm market down the way, headed south. Fergie Market?
Kings?
South of here?
It's right on the corner.
Oh,
They have a shop up in,
yeah.
is that King's?
It's
Yeah.
Kings.
Okay. You know, I think that's zoned commercial, but that could very easily be zoned ag, like all of its neighbors, because it's agriculturally related, you know, to that. But at the same time, we'd have to explain that whole process to that property owner. And so those are definitely more sensitive conversations to have with those parcels.
Yeah, there's the one right across the street from that too. That's got a little for rent space in it now. Yeah.
Mhm.
I have
And then-
one last question, the map. The map calls it timber residential, the ordinance calls it timber reserve.
Oh,
Is it one or
that's why you
both?
made that comment. I missed it. Yep. I will mark that.
Is it reserve or residential?
It is reserve, but
Residential's
it's
allowed.
kind of a bizarre zone, honestly. Like if I were going to go back through, although most of those properties probably do have a lot of timber, they might even be wet. It's a very low intensity district. It's kind of a bizarre district to me.
I've got questions when we get to Article 3 about all the different uses under there, because it seems anything can be built there, but you say it's a low intensity district. When I first looked at the table, I thought this table was the wrong table for here.
Yeah.
But it says that a whole lot of things are allowed.
In timber, that's like, and I pulled, the committee might have made a couple of changes in that district, but I kind of pulled it from our current one. That's where it started. And so, well, we can talk about it when we
Yep.
get there. Sorry.
Any other questions, comments about the map for now?
Okay. Let's
So-
get into Article 3 then. Okay. So the first couple pages are laying out, you know, the zoning map, how we use the zoning map, and this article. Any comments through there?
We're on 3.
Yes, so,
This is a section, I think, that needs, same thing, a little bit more of an introduction.
okay, let me make a note here.
Partly to explain the entire article and also just for consistency with the other articles.
Yeah, and then I had the question earlier about R1 versus R2. How, Sarah, you made the comment that R2 is basically R1, but you made a comment about water. I don't see that there's any correlation between the two with water.
As far as on the map, when you
Yeah,
look at the map, R1 is all along the water, and R2 is kind of
Oh,
the
I see
second
what you mean.
tier
Okay.
in from the water.
But as far as the use, similar,
Similar uses, R2
this is primarily for
allows
single and two-family dwellings,
duplexes.
duplexes, yeah.
And actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to redo the residential ones. I started doing in the zoning ordinance, I find it easier to find it, do one family dwelling, two family dwelling, three family dwelling. They end up at the top of the table that way when I just say one family dwelling, two family dwelling, and they're all grouped together. So like just now I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, there's single family. And I'm like, where's two family or duplex? And I'm having to look through the whole table. So I'd like to update those residential uses because that keeps them all together and they're at the top. And that's what everybody's looking for anyways. So that was something. So I guess anything besides the intro on the first couple pages, any other comments?
I had a question, determination of use. It says the zoning administrator makes the determination if the proposed use isn't clearly listed. Is that always the case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's interpretation done by the zoning administrator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
In that, I mean, it's not a, it's not a broad interpretation. Does this meet the definition of whatever use it is? And sometimes you can get them to fit into that use, and other times, as a zoning administrator, you're like, nope, too far off. But that's pretty standard. Okay, and then the map that's in your document is the same map that we pulled out here and blew up for you. So then getting into timber reserve.
So I thought the first paragraph in 3.2.1, is that for timber reserve or is that supposed to be for the water overlay district? And then there's really a second paragraph there that I would start with the provisions of this section. That seems to apply to the timber reserve overlay, but the whole first one's about its proximity to lakes, rivers, and streams. It just seemed like it was put there and maybe by accident. The first 5 or 6 lines.
Let me double check. I want to say that came out of,
I would have expected it to say something about the timber, the trees and something, but it's, here's why this district exists, because of proximity to lakes, rivers, and streams. And I think that's supposed to be the water overlay. The second paragraph is probably the one
no,
that's
that's
right.
why, because I have the same question. That's why I was like, I think this is a copy and paste from the current ordinance. It is.
So that first paragraph needs to go, and this page ought to start with the provisions of this section are intended to create a zoning district. Recognize,
Because when I.
it talks about timber resource production.
Yeah. But
And
the
then the
usage,
regulated uses is really confused me. The regulated uses under timber reserve or everything.
and that is based on what's in the current ordinance.
Okay.
That's the starting, and I'm not saying that just because it's in the current, it has to stay there. So I'm open to,
Because you have to have a special use permit for many of them, I don't struggle with it. I'm just surprised in that district, just about everything would be allowed.
It's really just focus on the ones that says by right. Those are the ones that
Right.
we have to be really sensitive to.
Oh, by right, it makes all the sense in the world, but there's some things in there that, I guess, list them,
Yeah.
but you have to have a special use permit and go through the planning commission and for religious institution as an example. But
So
if
what
it fits, it
kind-
fits.
what-
My comment was there, this doesn't seem to fit under this district, but I guess it does because you can say, well, we can do that. You just have to have a special use permit to do it.
Mhm.
the only one that I probably would change, and I feel like I saw this somewhere else, is home well, no, never mind, back up. I retried on it. But it's interesting because we talk about timber reserves, but there's no talk about timber in any of the uses.
I'm sorry, what was that?
The district is named timber reserve, but there's no talk of timber in any of the uses.
Right.
Seems, yeah, kind of interesting. I guess the other way of looking at it, is there anything in that list that just like, oh my God, doesn't matter, special use permit or not, we absolutely don't want to see that. I don't see anything that freaks me out too much. I guess maybe a cultural institution, I'm not sure what exactly that means.
Well, you look at the definition.
Oh, I guess I have to look back.
Cultural, I'll go back there.
Yeah, and if you want to go through a special use permit and it gets approved, it's in. If it doesn't get approved,
Yeah.
it's out. That's why I don't know that we need to strike any of them. It might be more, do we think other things need a special use permit?
Do you
Other
do you
than the
need an
things that are by
additional
right.
layer? Yeah. Cultural institution is environmental, educational, artistic, so museums, libraries, historical societies. conservation organizations. Well, if there's nothing jumping out at you, I mean, we'll be going through this again, so you can kind of think on it some
I had
more.
a comment that covers all the districts, and it was really on some of the requirements like fencing, to make sure that the tables here reflect changes made in some of the
Yes,
fencing things that I didn't check them myself, but if we've changed some of the ordinances on fencing heights and maximums, which we have, that they get correctly put into these tables.
updated, yep. Anything more on timber? So pages 29 and 30. And then we did create, so on 31, you see the diagram for the lot to try to help explain it again in another visual way. Okay, moving on to the agricultural district.
Sarah, I do have a question. I'm trying to catch up here. The duplex dwellings is a by right use of R2.
Mm-hmm.
Does duplex have a certain definition? Because does duplex by definition mean two-family? I mean, I can see how it does on one hand. It's building, when I think of duplex, I think it's one structure, two families living in the middle of it. Or, separating each half of it, so to speak.
Yeah, a building.
Is there another way?
So the definition says a building designed as a single structure containing two separate dwelling units.
That's contained in the definitions now?
That's in the definition. And I'm very sensitive to that definition because people have a lot of interpretation to what duplex or two-family means.
So you're sensitive to keeping it as duplex?
Yes.
Okay, that's good, because similarly, I had a concern around when we talk about, or when we label in the summary paragraph of R2, I think it calls about, we call it duplex as a by right, but then we call it two-family residential.
Mm. Yeah, and I believe that's what the title of it is right now, but I don't know. Yeah, we don't call them duplex in the current ordinance, so that was a translation from going to that. So the zoning district in the current ordinance is called 1-unit dwelling and 2-unit dwelling zone. So I just boiled it down to two-family residential. And then they have, the current says 1-unit and 2-unit dwellings.
We don't have to wordsmith it now, but I think we
Yeah.
should just be consistent, because the table says duplex by right, then we'll call it two-family. If duplex is a more precise definition, that gives us more
Yeah, and
control.
that's what, so I am going to change duplex to call it a two-family dwelling or something. I can't remember the exact terminology, but I would change, instead of duplex saying a single structure with two dwelling units, it'll say two-family dwelling, a single structure with two. I mean, when I say two-family, it's in one building, shared wall or a shared ceiling or, ceiling floor situation. They're not two separate single-family homes on the same lot. One structure is my intent for what it means.
So we just have to make sure that's all clear.
Yes.
So if a duplex or two-family dwelling is not allowed on my piece of property, but I have a building that fits that, but I have one family occupying both, therefore it's not a duplex or whatever we're calling it, because it's one family. Does that make any sense?
Isn't
that
so
two-
you have two buildings that both have dwellings?
One building
Yeah.
with two
Families.
units. It's one family though. Does it not apply?
No, because they're two. I'm looking at, it's the building and not the family. I really don't want to talk about what a family is
Right.
because the courts have litigated what's a family, and I have no interest in regulating what a family is, because families are whatever your family is, and who am I to tell you what your
So
family
what
is.
did you want to call it again?
I'm gonna call it a two family.
Family.
Two.
But we don't want to
I
talk
don't
about
know.
families.
Yeah, two-family dwelling, but my intent is to say that a two-family dwelling just means that two families, it's like,
But you don't want to say family, right?
well, I can, that's not
You
going
don't want
back
to talk
to
about
that. I know.
I don't know. It sounds gross.
Maybe I call it, I can't, see, it might be called like a two-unit dwelling. Can't remember what
Something
the
like
words
that
I
sounds-
use.
Okay.
I'm at a loss.
Okay.
But the definition would tell you that it's just two dwellings that are independent of themselves,
Yeah. Okay.
that a family may live
And
in.
it's in one structure.
Right. We have a definition for family, but I don't want to argue about that.
Yeah. No. I would avoid family
Yeah,
altogether
one
too.
structure.
Yeah. I like the way duplex is right now, and if you
Mhm.
slap a different name on it that doesn't talk about family,
Yeah.
I think you're
Yeah.
fine.
So the only thing that so there are sentences that did change in here. So you're talking about this two family. Well, one of the conversations that the subcommittee had, and this is a topic for the planning commission to consider, is in the R1 district, which is single family. And in the R2 district, they did add in accessory dwelling units as a use in there. So an accessory dwelling unit can be a standalone unit, could be attached to your house. The current ordinance had been interpreted to say that carriage houses are allowed as an accessory building. A carriage house has dwelling above like a garage. And so essentially allowing accessory dwelling units. I don't know that the ordinance is that crystal clear that that's what's supposed to happen, but that's kind of been the past interpretation of it and how it's been applied. And I think the subcommittee was like, well, let's throw it in there and see what happens. So this ordinance allows you to have an accessory dwelling in your residential districts. There are supplemental standards, which are in Article 6 that we'd have to talk about, and we may have to come back to that and to make sure that you're comfortable with what those regulations are for that. But you should know, an accessory dwelling unit could be a unit in your basement, could be a unit in your attic, it could be an apartment on the back of your house, it could be in a standalone garage.
But it's supposed to be one family.
Right. So you would have your
Whatever
primary
that
one
means.
family, and then you would have the smaller additional family unit that can be on the parcel in some form. I just don't want you to think oh, that would be cute, only over a garage. It's not restricted to only over a garage. It could just be a little pool house that somebody sleeps into.
Someplace you shove your aging parents.
Right.
Or
Or your children.
right. Exactly. Just
If the intent's to make it shared wall like duplex, you could do that in the open paragraph under that 2.5.1. It says, and two family dwellings. If you're concerned about confusion of it being two separate structures, I'd call it shared wall.
Yeah.
Two family dwelling. And even in the diagram or the picture you have on that, I drew a line on mine, put shared wall, you could call it out of the diagram.
Yeah.
And that diagram also shows two driveways. Is that required? Or
No,
that's just,
just an example.
okay. But if it is, then whether it's, you say family or two dwelling or
Right.
it's a shared wall, to me, duplex covers it. But maybe nobody knows, maybe not as many people know that, but if you put it in a diagram and call it a shared wall, two family dwelling,
And you got it in
That'll
the
provide a lot
definition
of
already,
clarity.
right?
Yeah.
That's good.
And we could put, I'll work on that, because I was gonna say, we could put two family dwelling unit duplex, behind it, I'm just trying to think like when you're looking through the table to make it make sense to review it, what's the easiest?
Yeah,
But we can
in
leave
all
that
of this,
for
I'm
now.
thinking about the efficiency of somebody before they, think about an application or to minimize the conversation or confusion going on. You're still going to have people come in and ask some questions,
Right.
but then you at least say, no, our
Right.
intention is a shared
Share
wall, not
Yeah, I
one
like
in the
that.
back of the property, one in the front.
Yep, I think that's good. Do we want to keep talking about districts and uses, or it's 10 to 8? Is it, is
time
this a
to-
good spot to kind of wrap up for the night?
I'd like to talk about one thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bit, in 3.6 about village. We've got an opportunity here, y'all, to stop having it called two things, village or hamlet. I think it'll be more confusing if we continue to call it village and or hamlet here when we do the master plan. Pick one. I'd vote village, but I don't have money on it either way. But I think calling it two is just silly. I think of two very different things when I think of village or hamlet.
Do you?
I do.
I'd love to see that picture painted.
Well, I'll give you inside of my
Okay,
head.
all right,
A
yeah.
hamlet is, Andy owns a whole thing and he's got other stuff going on. A village has some different uses. I even looked up the definition. There's some of that in some different definition. Goes back to the 1400s, the
Yeah,
idea of
sounds like
hamlet,
it.
village. And so I think what we want is a village feel with trying to put some concentrated commercial there. And that's not really what hamlets are.
Yeah.
But we could call it hamlet just because it's kind of unique.
Sounds
I think
old
it-
or hip.
But I thought it was villages or hamlets in quotes, and then I would take out the hamlets in quotes and call it a village, but I don't,
We've been calling Eastport a hamlet, us Eastport people.
let's keep hamlets then.
I know, I'm not wedded to it, but it seems more hamlet-like because
It
it
does.
isn't really a village where you can go to a little shop.
Do we want it to be that though? I'm kind of thinking, what do we want it to be?
Where you headed?
So the hamlet definition is a small settlement, generally one smaller than a village. Well, that helps.
I've called it both too. Never mind. Strike the motion. I wouldn't want to, I really wouldn't want to change it if the residents there have been calling it, and suddenly we're not, and I don't know if that matters, you'll keep
And I
calling it
don't
a
think that
hamlet.
it-
And everyone in here is a small group of houses, a little village. That's really what it seems to settle on.
Yeah.
Torch Lake Village already is a village, right? It's called Torch Lake Village. So we could have a village.
And one
and
of
There you
each.
go.
it would be really-
But
Mhm.
Torch Lake
Way to go
Village is
about it.
actually smaller than Eastport, I think.
Yeah. They seem like they have the wrong title. They should be flipped, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's pick that one up next time.
Okay.
People can ponder that one and we'll come back.
You're welcome.
So, no, I think we made good progress
Yeah.
tonight. And I think this whole section with going over the map and getting into this is really the meat and heart of the whole thing. So we need to take our time going through this. Any other questions or comments before we close off?
The only, I did have one thing noted, and I don't remember what necessarily this is about, other than it just says add air park, so that PC doesn't forget to discuss it for Article 3.
Do what?
Don't forget to talk about air park.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, what about next meeting?
Next meeting date, we briefly talked before the last meeting about not having our July meeting because I think there were multiple people out of town for that meeting. So we should get something else scheduled instead of just holding off until August. We've got started already on this draft ordinance. So I guess I'm kind of, let me send out some dates to figure out the next time we should meet. I don't currently have an application for the planning commission to consider. So we can just kind of keep working on the ordinance as we go along in that process. So Maybe, I don't know if anybody has their like, I know the 4th, the first week, the second week, we usually have our meeting, but out of town.
Yeah, I think this next regular meeting, we were not going to have because we already know we're missing several
Right,
people.
several. So I know July is kind of a tough month too. There's a lot of stuff going on in town, a lot of family in town, different things. So I'll send out some dates, see what we can get together for our next meeting date.
So we saying we are or are not having
No regular meeting in July.
no July meeting, no regular meeting?
No
Yes,
regular
We may
July
have
meeting.
a special meeting, kind of like this.
Okay. So we will have the regular meeting on August 8th.
So far, yes.
So far, okay.
And then this Monday, when we did it Monday, it worked really well. It seems like Monday, Wednesday type of thing was kind of.
Yeah.
As I hate doing it in July when the weather's so nice. I mean, it might be good to just knock 2 of them out like this.
So the special meeting in July will be to conclude this?
Yeah, it would be
Yeah.
just focus on
Review?
this. Yes.
Hopefully, we may need to have, we'll need to have at least 2 meetings, probably further on the zoning ordinance, maybe another one that just might be shorter. Maybe not, might take us just as long, kind of do definitions, some of the cleanup on the end, or come back to some of the topics. So I'm envisioning 3 more meetings to talk about the zoning ordinance. So we'll try
Yeah,
to, I'll try to get 3 scheduled if we can get them kind of close together.
I'd benefit from either the second one or the third one, seeing the changes we've gone through.
So far, okay,
Yeah, because a lot of them have been us giving you sort of vague direction on what to write.
Mhm.
And while it'd be another review, for me, I think, my assumption would be a much faster review, because I've got a bunch of notes in here to see how you interpreted 4, 5, and 6 people say, here's what we think it ought to be.
okay. Yeah, I'll work on some changes. That might be a good way to pick up at our next meeting, be like, here's what we've talked about last month.
Good review. Yeah.
Changes, and then get into working on the next chapters.
Okay. So
Okay,
you'll
with
send out
that-
an email with here's some
dates.
optional dates for at
Yeah.
least 1, if not 2 meetings in July.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll shoot for 2 meetings in July. And if everybody can make both meetings, wonderful. If somebody can't make one, we'll get at least 4 people, then we can make progress.
Yeah, especially because we're down 1 member right at the time too, so we'll keep moving.
Okay, with that, I guess we move out of the main agenda and move into public comment. No public comments this evening. So again, thank you all tonight. With that, let's have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that motion.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 At
Thank you.
7:55.